So doing the third batch of the pears from the controlled atmosphere storage or modified atmosphere storage. And this time, since the pans, the freeze dryer trays are already in the freeze dryer, I'm going to pre-freeze them in these small pans like I've been doing a lot. And the main reason I use these pans is kind of, I guess, a couple of reasons. One is these are a nice size to hold in the freezer for long term. Sometimes we've had 100 of these little blocks in the freezer. So after they're frozen, we can pop them out, put them in a Ziploc, and wait until their turn in the freeze dryer. And we've had 100 of these blocks waiting their turn. And 2.5 of these, or slightly less than half, fit the freeze dryer tray of the medium machine perfectly. It has to be a little bit less because 2.5 doesn't quite fit. That's why this is about 1/2 inch thick. So you take a little bit less than half and then 2 of these. It's a perfect fit for the tray. So we'll get these going and then I'll show you how we put them in the freezer. I'm going to add some ascorbic acid in here. About 1.5 tablespoons. And then we'll add another 1/2 tablespoon between each tray worth of pears. So we'll do about 2.5, 3 pounds of pears at a time, and then add another 1/2 tablespoon to make sure that the concentration stays strong enough to keep them from turning brown. So I like to take off just that very thin piece of peel at the end so that when you go to eat them, you don't have a big chunk of peel. Okay, so there's a 5-pack, right?
Yeah.
Now, that's about 2.5 pounds of pear pieces. And so we want about 1 pound in each one of these. A pound of pears in one of these pans, and then it can be pre-frozen in here and then popped out and put on the tray. And of course you can go directly onto the trays if you have extra trays, or if you're processing them slow enough to wait for the trays to be empty each time. For pears or pieces of stuff that's this sizes, it does work very well to put them directly on the trays, because these are going to end up being a little taller to make it work. But that's what we're going to do. And I won't be that careful with all of them, but on these half pans, to get them in there without having them too tall, that's the way I'm going to do it, is kind of stack them in there gently. Next, we'll see these going into the freezer and then show how we deal with the pans in and out of the freezer. Now we'll get the little 7x7 pans into the freezer. And I can get at least 24, sometimes 30 pans at a time just for pre-freezing. And then once I pop them out and put them in the Ziplocs, well, then I can put hundreds of them in there. So I already have the first 5 in there, and we'll just continue filling up this space. And then I have some of the corrugated plastic pieces trimmed so that they'll fit in here exactly, and make another layer. And I can put 4 layers in there with no problem, and sometimes 5 if it's just been defrosted. Another reason that I use these is because I have one of the older machines, the freeze dryers, and the tray, the rack is tilted slightly to the back. So I cannot do any liquid items without pre-freezing. So that's when I started doing the pre-freezing. I liked it, and we just do all kinds of pre-freezing now. And here's another shelf full. These are already depanned ones. There's 4 cubes in here, a half dozen cubes in there, more cubes back there, more back there, or blocks, they're not really cubes, and trays here. These are some of my sisters that she's pre-freezing in our freezer. We're back to the pears. It's batch 630 now. It was going to be batch 629. But again, number one child needed some strawberries, so we broke into the pears to do the strawberries. Now we're back to the pears. We got the one last batch. It's the ones that froze in the little 7x7 containers. So we'll get those out and show you how we're going to do those. So the trays were pre-chilled, of course. They left them in the freezer, and I don't need them on here until the end because I already know the gross weights of each one. Now, usually when we do food in the 7x7 pans, usually then we pop them out and put them into big Ziplocs to await their turn. But I didn't have anything else set right now, so I'm going to use these. And with some of the things like pears where there's lots of spaces around them, sometimes they won't stay as a nice block. So I want to get them all at once. Yeah, I can see them coming apart already. They'd be a little bit of a mess if I just put them in the bags. So I pre-froze the pans with the stainless steel rod in 4 of them, so I'd have enough for all 4 trays, 1 in each. And I did some of them in half trays. Well, I guess you saw all that just a second ago. I'm going to take this out, 1886, and put this in. And that was tray 4. Okay, now those are all ready for the freeze dryer. Let's get them in. This time the freeze dryer's been pre-cooling for about an hour and a quarter because, you know, I get them started, but I sometimes forget to come back on time. It says that the tray thermometer temperature, the one that's under the second level of the rack, is -33, and my thermometer on the side says -40. And this is a little bit smaller than the other couple of batches of pears, but it's still a good 10 pounds. It's going to take a while. Have a good solid seal ring around there, around the door, so we know that it's airtight right now and won't have any problem when it starts the vacuum portion of it. So we'll be back in about 2 days and take care of the rest of this. So don't go away, it'll be just a second. It's a couple days later. It's time to check the pears. They should have been checked about 2 hours ago, but I wasn't ready to do that, so I'd given it 2 more hours so that it would wait for me. It's been a total of 48 hours so far. Now we'll take them out, check them, and put them back in for the weight check. So first we'll bypass the rest of the time with the down arrow. Come on, little down arrow. There we go. Then we'll open the drain valve, and as soon as the pressure is equalized, we'll be able to open it up and check them. Now, starting with tray 1. And the heaters have been off for about 15 minutes already, so they've started to cool, and that's fine with these pears. 9:59. Okay. And at this point, if I ever find any cold spots, wet spots, anything, then I won't start the dry check yet. The dry check is only for when I think it's already done. So I'm pretty sure it's 100% dry, and I'm just checking it. So tray 2, 9:55, and it was bouncing down. Now we're going to switch places on these. Yeah, these feel completely dry, so that's an appropriate time to do a dry check. If it didn't feel like that it was dry for sure, I wouldn't do the dry check yet. The tray 2 I'm going to put up at the top, and tray 1 I'm going to put down a spot. So tray 3, 9:57, and tray 4, and that tray is definitely cooler, 9:60. Okay, so we'll put those back in also. Tray 4 will go up a spot, and tray 3 down a spot. That puts the 2 that were on the outside and the inside at the warmest spots. Then we'll get it restarted to do our test. Okay, close the drain valve. Now we'll add more dry time, and it'll remind me to close the drain valve. Continue, and it'll say it needs to cool, but it's cold enough because I've got the fan on it. And with the newer pumps, that's not the same concern anyway. So I've put 3¼ hours on the more dry time timer, but I'll come back in as short as 2¼ hours to check it. But I put 3¼ in case I can't make it back in time. So we'll be back in just a second. Don't go away. I'm back. It's been just a little over 2¼ hours. We're going to get them out and check them now. If they're not dry yet, of course, we'll put them back in. No, we don't know if they're dry yet. We won't know if they're dry or not. If they've lost weight during these 2 hours, we'll put them back in. We'll assume that we don't know if they're dry or not yet, because there's no way to know at a specific moment if it's dry. I can only tell over a period of time if it stopped losing weight. And if it stopped losing weight while it's heating the trays, then it should be dry now. So let's get them out and check them. I'm going to use the down arrow and bypass the rest of the hour, and then open the drain valve. Okay, and with the pressure equalized, we can get them out. Starting at tray 1. And that's a toasty tray. And no change. And that's the goal, is no change on each tray. Okay, no change on that one. Tray 3, and we'll look under there to make sure that it's not touching. It might be touching. I'm going to go ahead and move this tray out of the way. And no change. And that one looks lower. And tray 4. And this, of course, was the one that was on the bottom where it was the coolest. Okay, and that one is not touching, and no change. So we can go ahead and shut the machine off with no defrost. Make it much quieter in here. And I'll get this moved out of the way, and we'll come back and get the time and the power usage. So the time here shows about 50½ hours. However, we know we can back that up more than 2 hours because there was no weight drop during that time. So I'm going to take the, and it was 2¼ hours. So I'm going to go ahead and take the 2½ hours that it shows and go to 48 hours as how long did that take to dry. And of course it could have taken less time because I'd already added a couple of hours earlier so that it would be still going when I came back down for it. We know for sure that it was dry in 48 hours or less. And the previous batch was about 41½, and the one before that was about 51½. So a huge range depending on which batch. Now the power usage. Oh, before the power usage, next we'll get the my little defrost baffle into place. All right. And the main use for this little piece of foam core is just to help direct the air in at the top, so then it'll swirl around and come back out of the bottom. And it helps make sure that the door doesn't hit anything. It's hit this a few times, but that's fine. Okay, and we'll turn that on and let it do its thing as soon as we're away from it so we don't have to listen to it. The power usage for that batch of pears is 33.09 kilowatt hours, and we'll reset it, get it ready for the next batch. Now we'll get the thermometers out, get them weighed, and get them bagged. Tray 1. So here's what we've got once again. So the numbers were very similar to the previous 2 batches of pears from this same boxes, and you'd expect them to be similar, but they do change a little bit as they ripen, and they also dry out a bit over time. So it does change a little bit. So again, we have the batch number and all the description of what it is, the power usage, and the time. And then we have our gross weights before, and then the tray and parchment paper weight. Subtract that all out. That gives our net before and then our net after. And then the dry check numbers are meaningless. They're just a relative number. It doesn't matter if it has thermometers on it or not, as long as you weigh it the same before and after, or during the weight checks. Okay, so the whole 10 pounds is now 109 grams, so less than 2 pounds now, and it lost 3,775 grams of water. So just simply dividing this by 10, and it'll bag them approximately, it's barely over 1 pound per bag. So I need about 80.9 grams per bag. And I already have my bags pre-labeled. And I'm just using a piece of paper that I print and then cut out and tape onto the bag because it's cheaper than most stickers. And I already have all this. So I've got the batch number on the bag in felt pen in case this tag gets ripped off for whatever reason. And in case we lose this tag, we can refer back to all the notes that I keep and find out more about this batch. So I've got what it is, when it went into the freeze dryer, the amount before drying, and then the water loss. And I put it in grams because I usually use a scale, but I guess it's important to remember that for water, that grams and cubic centimeters and milliliters are all the same thing. I mean, they work out to the same number. So 377 grams is also 377 milliliters. So you could use it that way for measuring or convert it to ounces. So now let's get them bagged. Whoa. So I've got the pears bagged in 10 1-quart bags. Now I'll add the oxygen absorbers.
Yeehaw!
And of course you could vacuum seal these. If I were going to vacuum seal them, I would still put an oxygen absorber in. One last thing I'm going to add is I'm going to add a gross weight to each bag so I'll know if something goes wrong with the bag. Extremely unlikely that I'll ever need this number. It's unlikely that I'm going to have a batch of bad bags, but I did once, and they gained 1 to 4% of weight. Those are ready for storage.